And now we're going to hear from a true hero. John Warren was an Army sergeant. He survived 5 IED blasts, got 2 Purple Hearts. But he had the invisible injury of PTSD, and he cycled through many, many therapies, aggressively pursuing this, and finally found relief with a breakthrough in magnetic wave brain zapping. That's my phrase. It's got a more, it's called transcranial magnetic stimulation, but I like brain zapping. First, we're going to watch this quick video.
Hi, my name is John Warren. In a minute, you're going to meet my best friend Scott Stephenson and myself. We're both proud Americans. We're both proud combat veterans. And we're both proud survivors of PTSD. I can't tell you how good it is to be able to say that, a survivor of PTSD. For all the training I had preparing for war, boot camp, airborne school, special forces training, and unit training, I was never trained for what was to come next. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It is an artifact of war. It is an artifact of sleepless nights, long-term stress, and trauma. It happens far more often than anyone ever thought. Until just recently, it has carried a great stigma and been buried in shame. It was our dirty little secret. It must mean we are weak or not who we think we are. It must mean that we are less than. Nothing is further from the truth. PTSD can happen to anyone. It is not a coward's or weakling's disease. It does not come from a lack of preparation, lack of fortitude, or lack of bravery. It just comes. Let me say that again. It can happen to anyone. That is the truth, and people are finally starting to get it. I think people tried to pretend it didn't exist, as much from the perceived embarrassment as from the fact no one knew how to handle it, let alone treat it. I suffered with it for 7 long years. I was lucky. I was aware of what was going on in me. I didn't like it, and I made it my mission to get through it. Along the way, I tried nearly every treatment out there. I took a pharmacological approach through a variety of SSRIs, tricyclics, benzodiazepines, and sleeping meds. In addition to medication, I tried a variety of counseling approaches to include cognitive behavioral therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, virtual reality prolonged exposure therapy, mindfulness therapy, and transcendental meditation. I even had injections in my neck called stellate ganglion blocks in an attempt to reset my sympathetic nervous system. Furthermore, I earned a degree in psychology in an attempt to find peace through understanding. My treatments and education provided me with some insights and healthy perspectives. Unfortunately, having the right insights and perspectives wasn't enough to ease my emotional distress. I couldn't feel what I understood to be true. I wasn't really a success at anything besides hiding my PTSD. I kept at it though. I think that's what caught the eye of the LA Times. They were looking to do a story on someone who was a success story, someone who had gone through the gauntlet of treatment strategies and emerged free from PTSD. But what they got was me. They followed me around for about a year documenting my story and my recovery. They saw through my PTSD poker face pretty quickly. They saw me intoxicated from drugs and alcohol constantly. They saw me get out of jail, unable to remember how I got there. They saw me get out of the emergency room, unable to remember how I got there. At the time that story ran, I was not PTSD free. And I was getting scared I might never be. As it turns out, I was wrong. And that's why I'm here tonight. I want to tell you about the thing that helped me the most. The treatment that allowed me to feel what I knew to be true. The treatment that allowed me to get sober, off all medications, and that freed me from the chaos in my head. The treatment that made my healing possible.
Now, as the LA Times eloquently told the story, one of the big things bothering John is he felt like when there was an IED explosion, he didn't do enough to save his friend, Scott Stephenson. And then when he found a breakthrough with this magnetic wave therapy, one of the first things he thought is, I gotta call Scotty. This is Scotty. He is one of the most upbeat guys, a very upbeat guy I've ever encountered. He lost track of he can't remember whether he had 65 or 70 surgeries to repair the burns over 66% of his body, and that he was in and out of the hospital for 3 years. But the injuries to the mind were there too. And when John called Scotty, Scotty got help as well. Now, John, why don't we start off with an interesting line that you told me yesterday that we heard Dr. Amen say. He said that when you do these scans and you learn that the problem is medical, not moral. Talk about that, because when you finally saw your scan, what'd you think?
That was a really relieving moment for me. When I was going through all these years of what seemed to me constant failure with always drinking and always using drugs and letting my family down, my friends down, it was just something that was eating at me. I didn't want to be acting that way. So for a long time, it's hard to even think, well, do I even have something wrong with me, or am I just not, do I not have the fortitude or the diligence or the discipline? So to actually be able to sit with Dr. Jin, who you'll meet shortly, and to have him pull up an EEG that shows tangible proof that, you know, there's something wrong here. The frontal cortex, in my case, was largely sleeping. Even though I was awake, Dr. Jin says, "Oh, you're sleeping right now." And I said, "No, I'm talking to you." However anxious I may have been, but it was very freeing in that moment to think, you know what, this isn't my fault. I have up against a flawed system, and if he could do what he claimed to reverse that damage and to fix that system, then, well, I might have a chance to going back to being myself again.
Okay, and so then you undergo this magnetic wave therapy, and I did it yesterday. I went to the Brain Treatment Center. It's near here. It's about a ping pong paddle-sized, thick wand, and they touch it. They did it on my spine to see if it could ease brain signals to pain. So they start this therapy. It's 1 hour a day, every day. How soon did you feel a result? Did it take a couple months, or?
It's actually 30 minutes a day, and which is nice. The very first day was when I experienced the first transition for me. Anybody with PTSD will probably attest to the fact that sleep is a really big issue, and getting to sleep is difficult. A, because we have nightmares, and the other part is the rest of the world finally goes to sleep, and there's less stress around us, and we can actually enjoy a little bit of peace and quiet. So after the very first treatment, I was calm and relaxed, and I slept for 8-9 hours straight without waking up, and I hadn't done that in 9 years. And I didn't know to test that.
After the first day?
After the first therapy, which was too shocking to me. I thought, well, that's placebo. That's weird. I just happened to sleep, but after time and time again, I've seen it with other veterans.
All right. And then you call Scotty. So Scott, you went in for the treatment, and you kind of found rather rapid results.
Yeah, when I showed up at the Brain Treatment Center, I was going to bed at probably 5, 6 in the morning, 7, staying up to the point where I couldn't stay awake any longer. Like you said, nightmares, anxiety, also the quietness of the night. And it's the same thing. I went in, had my first treatment, and I went to bed at 9:30 at night for the first time in 8 years. And I was laying on the couch starting to get tired, and I just looked at John. I was like, "What kind of voodoo magic did you do? I don't like it."
That's great. And the thing about sleep I learned yesterday at this center is that sleep is when your brain builds glucose, that it helps the brain cells function. And so without sleep, the brain isn't healing itself. And so where else should we take this? What do we ask next?
Well, I think one of the other important things to talk about is what it is for anxiety. PTSD, I believe, largely is an anxiety disorder. It's pervasive, it's constant, and that's what leads, or at least led me to a lot of drugs and alcohol, was just trying to find some sort of peace and some sort of ability to interact with the rest of the civilian community. So I know that in my instance, after about 2 to 3 weeks, I had a drink with a buddy, and usually if I had a drink, it was to the point of intoxication, blacking out, and hopefully I didn't end up in the emergency room or hospital. In this particular instance, I just didn't feel a need to try to feel better and to calm down. And I think Scott experienced something similar.
Yeah, I was drinking a lot or smoking weed to be able to go out into society and interact with people on a level that I felt was normal. And within the first few weeks, that anxiety level dropped off, and the necessity for those things was gone.
You know, your physical injuries are obviously quite severe, but in terms of the injury to the brain and the mind, when you started fixing that, did it help in any way on the physical front?
The sleep habit, the protection of the sleep habit is largely a part of the Brain Treatment Center's therapy. And I noticed that going to bed at the times that they asked, I actually started to heal faster. The blood perfusion to the organs drops and the cortisol level drops, which allows your immune system to kick in and do what it's supposed to.
You sound like some of the doctors here. You're pretty
I just paid
expert.
attention.
Yeah. John, is there any part of you, I mean, as joyous as this breakthrough is and as encouraging as it is there any part of you that's upset that thousands of, I mean, the treatment center has been able to treat pro bono 64 veterans, I believe it is, in the past year.
Correct.
But does it bother you guys that, hey, world, wake up. Hundreds of thousands of veterans could be doing this right now.
It is so frustrating. Just this morning, I had 3 phone calls from friends, very close friends of mine, that are getting worse. They're on more medications. That the protocol for the most part right now is we prescribe more meds and try to get you into more therapies. And to actually have something that is time and time again giving guys their lives back. Wives are coming in crying, what did you do to my husband? He's not flipping out. He's not mad. He's not irritable all the time. It's very frustrating. I go around and do a lot of promoting with the Brain Treatment Center with Scott.
We should point out, John has joined the Brain Treatment Center to assist other veterans, and the doctors there say, you know, the vets won't listen to us, but they will listen to John.
It's true. No other veterans going around saying, hey, you got to try this Prozac. It's absolutely amazing. But this is amazing, and it is very valuable when you hear another veteran say that they found something that works, because we're looking. We are looking, and we don't want to be continually acting the way that we're acting, and in this life of fear is what it.
Scott, want to add to that in some way?
I definitely, everywhere I go now, I talk to people about the Burn Treatment Center and what they're doing. It's aggravating to see that we're not being able to get it out there fast enough to help guys. I actually just lost a friend last week from PTSD. So it hit real home, or it really hit home for the necessity to get this out there.
Yeah. So what's the answer, do you think? Possible moves to get this more spread widely?
I think just spreading the word at this point is my insight, as far as we need help. We need funding. We need more people, more facilities.
Yeah. It sounds like government, and they're well-intended and they try really hard, but it's a very long cycle before it gets the right approvals, and then the insurers may not cover it until the government gives the approvals. So maybe this is more of a thing that, a philanthropic, we need a couple billionaires to weigh in here.
Oh, very possibly. That would be nice. That would help out a lot. If you're out there, come talk to me afterwards. But really, that is very frustrating. I just got back from a trip in D.C., and I understand there's so many things out there that people want to say, hey, this is really helping PTSD, or this is really helping the veterans, that aren't. There's not the proof to go along with it. And they need that data to an extent, but it's so frustrating because in order to collect all this data, it takes years and years. And with 22 veterans dying a day, we just lost, Scott's friend not too long ago.
That's 22 suicides.
22 suicides. That's
every
a football team a day. And there's the uproar that I feel that would be attached to, if a football team every day was dying, we would find a solution, and if we did, we'd make it happen right away. And why is it when our veterans are dying, 22 a day, that it just goes, oh, well, that's a crazy statistic. That's unfortunate.
Scott, one of the speakers yesterday, I believe he was a 33-year veteran Marine, said, I don't like that sometimes the image of wounded vets is broken. And they're not broken. What do you think of that observation? Do you worry that people look at you and feel like you're broken? Because, when I talk to you, you don't feel broken at all.
The image of being broken, it's a stigma. It's, how society views us, and it's not fair to us. We're not, like they said yesterday, damaged goods. Yeah, we need a little hand up here and there, but, I'm pretty upbeat, I think. And,
yeah. I said to the guys, rather inartfully, I'd said before the panel, I'd said, hey, break a leg. And Scotty said, hey, I only have one. Okay, that's good. Yeah.
I want to touch briefly on the point of avoidance with PTSD. is something that leads to a lot of the symptoms you see with the drugs, alcohol, the outbursts. We, to a large part, don't have the emotional control over the past events. So having the mind constantly racing, constantly wandering back to, seeing Scott on fire and burning and in pain, and not having any control over that, and my emotions getting the best of me, I don't know how long I'm going to be down in this slump and in this emotional roller coaster. So it leads to just trying to get as far away from those kind of memories as possible. As a result of this treatment, in my case, and Scott and I have talked about this a lot, it's one of the most freeing abilities to be able to be proud and embrace our past and embrace our service and embrace what we've gone and done and not have our emotions control us. To be able to, if I'm moved, I can cry about the event that day, but it doesn't keep me down for months at a time. So really to keep the memory, to be able to go there and not be controlled by it is incredible.
And Scott, I'm sorry to throw you a curveball, but a last line of advice for anyone who has a friend with PTSD in terms of how they could try to help?
Keep on them, keep an eye, push them to get help. And if they reach out, do whatever you can to help them. You never know when they're going to take a turn for the worst.
And now we're going to hear from Dr. Kevin Murphy. He is Chief of Pediatric Radiation at University of California, San Diego. He is a U.S. Navy vet, and he's doing some great breakthrough work. Let's listen.
So first of all, these guys are fabulous. I was on an aircraft carrier back in the first Gulf War as an engineer, and we would send off these troops into the black skies. And we were always so fortunate to be sitting on the aircraft carrier in air conditioning, watching this happen in a sense, and having some of that guilt, that these guys were going in such harm's way. So the word hero isn't even big enough to describe you guys. I wanted to touch on a few things and talk about some of the data on PTSD that we're seeing at this company that I'm working with now called Brain Treatment Center and Newport Brain Research Lab. And show a few slides on the PTSD, then talk about autism briefly because I got involved through autism. And it's telling us a lot more about the brain than just maybe locations or imaging. I think we have to think of the brain as a bigger, more complex structure, almost like an orchestra that's singing. And if we're not seeing and hearing appropriate harmony, our brains can sense that, first of all, and it creates stress and trauma in the brain. About October of last year, I took my son up to the Brain Treatment Center for evaluation for autism, for Asperger's disorder. And here I am. I'm a neuro-oncologist. I treat pediatrics. I have a neurophysiology degree. I'm in the business. And I've got a son who I cannot help, who's got trouble with school, who makes no eye contact, who has stimming behavior, who is smart behind the scenes but can't really communicate with them. And we tried OT and PT and gone through the regular drugs at one point. And finally, I went back to my neurophysiology roots and took him to look at transcranial stimulation through an EEG-guided process called magnetic resonance therapy. And I'm in the lobby of the Newport Brain Research Lab up in Newport. And as I'm waiting for my own son to get his therapies, I'm seeing a lot of service members walk through, and they're coming in, using the word broken would be a term. They're looks in some cases homeless. You would wonder if they would make it back the next day. A week or so later, I'm still sitting there, and they come in, shaven, they got a high and tight, and they're dressed almost in their service uniform with their complete different affect. And I'm looking at this and talking to Conway, the president, and Jen, who you'll hear from shortly, Dr. Jen, and I'm dumbfounded that even before I saw my own son's benefits, I was seeing these demonstrative changes that were not subtle in these patients getting the therapy in a week. To make a little long story short, I was so, even before my own son was seeing a lot of benefit, I got one of the machines, put it in my clinic down in San Diego, in my cancer clinic, and started treating just about everything, from PTSD patients to autistic kids and Alzheimer's and TBI patients and so forth, even eating disorders. And we do EEGs, we verify that there's a disturbance, and then we synchronize the brain with the magnetic therapy. And I had to prove to myself that it was so amazing. And sure enough, one of the stories I'll just share was one of our Marines who came in, and John had to get him in because he wouldn't come listen to Dr. Murphy. He wanted to hear what John had to say, and that was perfect. John called him. We dragged this guy in. He's clenching his teeth, and he's holding his hands like this. He'd been up all night. He'd been drinking 18 beers a day. And he was going to kill himself. And he was a fiancé of one of our staff. And in the first treatment, he starts to relax. And I see him just put his arms down. And we had a remarkable experience with him. This was on Monday. And on Thursday, he had stopped drinking. And he came to me in DTs, actually, because he'd stopped drinking so fast. And I'm like, go home and have a beer, first of all. You can't stop that fast. And this kid, after about 3 weeks, was a completely different person and actually stopped with our therapy. His EEG normalized, so we had proof that it was real. And I saw it with my own eyes. So what I want to show you is what BTC and NBRL has done and how I'm involved again. And if you look at this, this list of changes, there's been about 60-some service members treated with PTSD. There's a lot of anger issues, of course, and some carrying weapons and so forth. And tinnitus is really a side effect, really, of having a concussion. And this idea that if you look at your brain and see changes that aren't coherent, it's actually a relief for the service member to not necessarily beat themselves up. They can see it and go, you know, there's a reason why I feel this way. Look at my brain. No wonder I'm so anxious. You can see the anxiety bands in the EEG. You can see the slow wave bands in the EEG. And so, to me, I immediately saw these patients become less self-angered and less, culpable of their own problem. They realized it's not really my fault that I behave this way. I'm going to fix what I'm doing. If you look at the next slide here, we took these patients and we do PCLM scores, which is a PTSD sort of scale. And as you go up on the left, the higher the number of disturbances you have under PTSD. And anything really beyond 17, 20 is considered to have some disorder. We took very high PCLM patients, and began their therapies. And by 2 weeks, you can see this change occurring on the same set of criterion. About half the patients really can get below a point where they even have that disorder described to them. So I want you to think about the brain really, and the disorders that we describe as being global. And whether it's autism or sleep or pain, even chemo brain, which I'm treating now, the problem in many ways is not locationally driven. It's spatially and frequency driven. And going back to the analogy of an orchestra, if you've got part of the brain speaking at this frequency or tone or pitch, and this part at a different tone and pitch, the music sounds terrible. And the brain has to live with that and not communicate in some sense to each other. So the way we're seeing what's happening now is we're getting this idea of synchrony occurring by giving a certain frequency and restating that brain's course and restating its frequency as one unit.
And now we're going to hear from the man behind the magnetic wave technology that helped Dr. Kevin Murphy's 9-year-old son, and that is helping, so far, dozens of veterans. Let's listen to Dr. Yi Jin of the Brain Treatment Center.
Thank you. Well, who am I? I don't think I deserve that much applause. And compared to our heroes, compared to our thought leaders, and then Dr. Daniel Amen, we worked together for many, many years. We have so much in common, and we believe that the brain is the center of everything. So that I literally set up this clinical brain treatment center. Although I'm a psychiatrist to start with, but I quit my job 30 years ago after I first, in the 2 years of my resident training, I taste the medication, I give it to my patients, but only 10% of it. That drug knocked me out for 3 days. Then I quit my job. Later, I joined UC Irvine. I was put on the fellowship training program that I'm in charge of that program for 5 years. And then later, the dean's office kicked me out because I encourage every resident to try the medication. Well, I regret it. Otherwise, I'll continue to be a professor there. Well, overall, I developed the whole thing against myself. Because 30 years ago, when I first graduated from medical school, I want to be a cardiologist. At the last moment, I figured psychiatrist seems to be a virgin land. It's a lot more fun and a lot more unknown. But my dad was smarter. So he said, you are full. And it said, what makes you to believe you can use your full brain, the dumb brain, to figure out why it's so dumb? I mean, and 30 years later, still ask me the same damn questions, you know? So, I mean, that really pulled me out of that traditional psychiatry. You know what the psychiatry is? Okay, psychiatry is based everything on phenomenology. So-called phenomenology is a psychology-based, you know, like a Freudian idea. But 1950s, that's a modern psychiatry starts, and then they start to use medical treatment to deal with the same phenomena that cardiologists try to deal with. So that the idea is that sometimes I just put in an analogy that in the fall, when you look at outside of your window, and on the tree, you have a different type of colors of leaves. The cardiologist, Dr. Smith, came over and then pick up the yellow leaf, call you yellow leaf syndrome. The other doc, if you go to VA, and then they may look at the time when the leaf turned out to be green, and then go green leaf syndrome. So they give you 5 or 4 different diagnoses, and they give you different treatment. How many people really get out of that trouble? I don't see none. Okay, so that's the problem that pulled me out of this. And then later, I happened to have a chance to work with a fruit fly. And when I look at the little creatures, and I have a question. So what makes me to work with the neurons there, but not the neuron to work with me? The other way around it, because I believe that fruit fly shares almost identical neurons as we have. So I come up with a conclusion that our consciousness or symptoms is a product of our neuron, but our neurons are not conscious. So there is another equivalent type of argument is that our brain cannot, it's hard to believe the brain is configured based on our folk psychology. There must be, the neuron must follow some other rules behind that. So yesterday I had a meeting, such a honored meeting with General Corelli, the 4-star general, and he gave a talk yesterday, I believe. And he questions very nicely. Now he's in charge of a very large brain research laboratory. And he said, well, psychiatry based everything on phenomenology, and then now everybody claims they have biomarkers to help you diagnose. I go, what is the idea of this? This is a circular logic, right? You have a psychiatrist give you a diagnosis, and you find a compound, you find an image to verify that the diagnosis is right. But a psychiatrist will argue, why do you need that? Because I make a diagnosis for you anyway. So that he come up with a very interesting question, that what is the physics behind that? So what is the physical law behind that things? So that's the things that sort of puzzles me for 30 years. In the past 30 years when I work at the UC Irvine, and we have a chance to work on PET scan, MRI. I mean, I totally agree with Dr. Daniel Amen that these images give you some pictures, but the picture itself is not everything. But at least they give you one thing that tells you how much of energy the brain uses. Okay, let me give you a very simple physics behind that. If you take your brain out, my brain, I know how heavy it is. It's 2% of your body mass. If you put on the weight, on the scale, it's 2% of your body mass. It consists of about 100 billion neurons in there. And every neuron consumes a huge amount of energy each time the neuron fires. So that the question I have in the past 30 years is that you burn that much of energy. It's equivalent to 20% of a total energy budget. And also burns on glucose only, so that if you take a bowl of a pasta, 50% of it goes to your brain. So I go, if you burn that much of energy in there, where does the heat go? I know when I drive my car, the combustion engine will have an efficient coolant to cool off the brain. You have a radiator, you have a fan. But our skull is an insulator. Okay, when you go in Alaska, you don't get frozen right away. You don't go, if you go Kenya, you don't get it, heat stroke right away because we have a skull. The skull is not a radiator. And a lot of people believe we have a blood that it can carry the heat out. I go, no. You measure the temperature in your car. Okay, the coolant, it's very cold. When you pump into the engine, it come out as hot water so that you carry the heat out. But our brain doesn't have that luxury because you have 98 degrees of blood liquid pump into your brain, then come out still 98 degrees. So there is no temperature gradients. So what is the way to cool off the brain? I know that if you don't cool off the brain, you have 2 consequences. Either the system set on fire or stop working from accumulating more heat. because this is the basic law in the physics. Okay? And later we did a further study. We found that, and then now verified by Yale University, that if you follow your diurnal lifestyle, which we human beings are, we're not nocturnal. I'm warning you, okay? Don't sleep late. That if you follow your diurnal sleep, by, let's say, 10 o'clock you go to bed, between 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., your brain will cool off, basically reduce metabolism by 44%. Okay, and also you will accumulate 30% ATP molecules. That ATP is the energy reservoir for individual neuron to work on. Okay, now John and Scotty mentioned very interesting things. He said every PTSD soldiers, you realize that when you come back, you cannot sleep at all. Why? Because when you're deployed, you're in a different time zone. When you're military action, because we know our military in the States, we always say we own the nights. Okay, we have a night vision goggles. Okay, we definitely win the war because the enemy cannot see us. Guess what? When you come back home, the evil haunt you. All right, because we're in the different time zone. So that you don't see PTSD on the stage, but rather coming back home. And sleep is the key. How do we normalize the sleep? So that's our mission. So that in the past 4 years, we've focused on PTSD, focused on autism, but based on the very simple principle, we need to cool off the brain. Now you haven't seen the how we deal with the information yet, right? Symptoms are information. John mentioned very interesting things. He said, I feel safe. I know it's safe when I was in the problem. But now, I just don't know why I feel so edgy, so anxious, so nervous, so insecure. But now when I treat it, and I still remember, I treasure the memory of my traumatic stress event, but I don't have the same emotional response. So now you need to notice that our emotional response, our anxiety response is actually very effective coping mechanism. It's a fight or fly skill for us to survive as animals. But unfortunately, our human society is a lot safer. We don't have to have that. But when you deprive your sleep, you eventually will have that because your brain is in a very chaotic states. So we're about to publish a paper to use our EEG measurement to directly measure the chaotic states by entropy. And then we know the entropy is an indirect measure of our heat in the brain. So that this is the whole thing is based on our thermodynamic law. And then we found that the information processing is an epiphenomena. Our symptoms is actually just a facade of this disturbance of the thermodynamic in the brain. So that's how we started. And I really want to thank for our heroes here. And then, by the way, we have, do you mind to stand up, our PTSD veterans? And then you are all treated here. Thank you, guys. And these are our veterans that sacrifice so much. And then they came here with the same problem as Scotty and John has shown. Now they're all recovered, and half of them are employed by us now. They are the best therapists that we've ever had. Now we think that we start a new war against this disease. So if you have questions after this session, I welcome you to talk to them. Thank you very much.